Hey guys, so this video we're going to do a little 2D and 3D concept design, play around with blocking out and get into this. So one of the only courses I've ever taken, official courses anyways, is on architectural design. So we'll get started with that here in Krita. We'll talk about just how you come up with like floor plans, but it's really nothing more than this. It's kind of, you're just sketching out cubes perhaps. Let's see what I got going on with the layers. Oh, I'm using gray, not black. That's what it is. All right. You just start sketching out kind of these rectangles if you wanted to. And a lot of architecture is designed this way, where it's just rectangles on rectangles. Nothing more than this, perhaps. And you're adding little extensions and do compound shapes, more or less. You might add things later on, like pillars, so you can do wrappers or whatever the case. But that's the general idea, is that you're building things out little by little in this manner. And adding all your decorative elements, maybe like a patio or something. Who knows? Right? And then you'd lay out your rooms and windows and doors and interior walls. Now, same thing can happen with hard surface. But you could start in kind of a box if you wanted to. So you've probably seen this before in other videos, some of mine maybe, where you split things up at different ratios. There's one that's common that a lot of people like to use, which is 70-20-10. So you could think you're going to have most of this shape being 70%, and then you might have a 20% section, so maybe like 20, and then like a 10. So something like that anyways. And then in this area, you can break that up again, right? So like you can define shapes in this area, and it'll roughly follow those guidelines there as far as shape breakup, the different ratios. So you can see, just chisel away at the edges a little bit maybe, and play around with this quite a bit, and you can make some rather interesting stuff very fast, perhaps. All right. And so I've already done this a number of times over, and you'll see here at the top, basically the same idea. So all up in that cubic area. This is kind of, we'll get to that one. But you can do this with squares. You can do this with circles. Play around with like your breakups, different elements you're going to put into it. You can see here, you can do like insets, which would make this all still the dominating feature here, but you might have a little kind of bars in here, support structures or whatever. You could do things like that. Maybe it's just an inset. It's pushed down. That's like supporting, but there's no holes in here. So we could add like some, whatever we want in there, screws or something. But, make it make sense, make it functional perhaps. And so when we're looking at something like this, you can free sketch these things super fast. And as you're working on them, just have fun with it. Play around with your shapes, your designs, your breakups, things like this. And you compound them just like you would with rectangles, but you use more curvy type shapes perhaps, or do straight lines and then bevel corners, things like that, right? So what you're looking for, though, is that breakup, that whole overall shape. We're going to break it like there. You can see if this was going down, broke it about there. So it's kind of that same idea, that same layout. And so if you want to add like a cylinder back here, perhaps, you can do things like this. And it still follows that same basic principle of just using more interesting breakups, not doing everything in the middle, like 50% breakups. So it's going to be kind of boring. Sometimes you can get away with it, but you can see how this all starts to work out eventually. Make it all a little bit more interesting, perhaps. Right? Just add some edge breakups, little edge differences there. Then you can add your details later, and you follow that same kind of concept. So your details, you do the same things. That's what the circle is for. Fortunately, I was recording this in Pokeball, right? Anyways, the idea is that you can start to figure out different ways of breaking things up and have a little bit of fun with it, adding different kinds of details to it and seeing what you can get going, basically. It's kind of like a smiley face, like a crazy smiley face thing. Anyways, but yeah, that's the idea. So, you sketch out whatever it is you want to sketch out. It doesn't even have to be that crazy. And you take these into Blender. So here in Krita and Photoshop, whatever, usually you can just select something with a square marquee selection, edit, copy, merge, right? Or you could save it out if you want. Go over it into something like Blender. Blender has an add-on that will let you paste reference images. So you hit Control-Shift-V with that add-on. If you had copied it, which I did not. And it'll paste it in just basically like this when you're in a side view. Otherwise, you press Shift-A, image reference, and you save your image, load up your reference image when you go find it, load it up from a side view usually, right? So as orbiting, hold. Now, this is where you get into just kind of concept modeling, block out. And I think this is an easier way to work a lot of times than doing booleans, but you could also do Boolean n-gon workflow, no problem. But any of these shapes we can make manifold later on, so they're non-manifold when they're open-edged like this. If you don't see it like this, you turn backface colon on, so you can tell when there's no faces there. And just start modeling with whatever you want, really. Planes, cylinders, boxes, it doesn't matter. I do planes a lot. I think it works out quite well. And we can shift shapes around, do all kinds of fun stuff like this. Do not take for granted vertex snapping. So I'm going to have that on up here, and I'll use that in this as we kind of play around with creating some of this. But you create a plane. You can lay it out where you need it to go. You can rotate it if needed. So press RY90. If you want to turn the move tool on and use it at the same time, you can come up here, hit move. And so I like to use the move tool quite a bit, but not always. And sometimes I just feel like it's just easier just to click it, but other times I just rather press G and move, but whatever the case. So you can see we can run this one probably all the way through for now. Just give it something like that. And we're trying to establish different things here, like the depth of things. So we can change the depth. We can add curvature, perhaps, maybe even bevels and things like that as well. But the main idea is that we're just trying to establish the big overall forms, and those forms you can detail later as needed. So you can see, like, we can move that in. Like, we could bevel it right now, but usually you line it up with the edges, and then when you later on, if you want to hit Control B and V, you can bevel a vertex, do something like that. N-gons can get a little squirrely to work with sometimes, so trying to use quads could be useful, but it's not required either. You can see where this is starting to go now. Like, we want to push that in. Maybe we do something like that. Who knows? Maybe we pull these ones out later on right here. You see I didn't fill those in. Let's do that. Oh, that didn't all get attached quite the way I thought it was going to. Let's get that back out. Build it there. Got a wild little triangle thing going on back here. Let's take that, fill it, take the two faces, Control X, dissolve it. I gotta merge some of this back together. I was making this as a tutorial video and then power went out, so I lost the video. But so these things here are not combined. You can still vertex snap them into place, right? If you want to do that. And that's the whole point of this little section here. I just helped something back there by accident, but you can just build it in little chunks and sections. You don't have to combine it all right away. So if you want to swap out panels later on, you know, you can do that, or maybe try something different under here. You can do that as well. And you can see where this kind of goes. Like, we use symmetrize tools, mirrors, all that fun stuff. We need to make another shape. Just make another shape. Don't worry about it. Rotate another plane out. Go into edit mode, hit Alt-Z, turn that on. Grab some vertices. And start working it out, basically. And just like that, there we go. So now we can do maybe like a loop cut and just push these ones in so we get like a little bit of a rounded effect. Probably want to go all the way to the center, so symmetrize over, it'll do that number. Maybe not. You know, sometimes you want to have just a little edge there to do that. Later on, you can dissolve that middle one, perhaps. Mesh Machine by default, when you symmetrize, it won't do that middle edge. I don't care for that, but that's something you could do. You could leave that on. I turn it off. That's why it's doing it like it is. Okay. This top one here, you can, when you have multiple objects, so if I switch to random, change my mat cap real quick, you'll see we have random or multiple objects going on right now. You can Alt-Q between these, select different ones. Right, so this top one I want to work on, Alt-Q to it. I can select the edges here, and we can go ahead and pull those down as well. If it ever bothers you that you have, for example, both sides, like sometimes you don't know if you're grabbing the front side or the back side. when you symmetrize, you can hit X. Oops, see if I can do this right. When you hit Alt X, you hit X again. Okay. I think I changed it to Alt X actually. But anyways, before you symmetrize, press X again. And now it'll cut it in half. So you don't have to worry about those back faces no more, which is kind of nice. And as long as it's going across the origin point for the symmetrize, you're good for the most part. All right, but this gives you opportunity now to like say like, hey, you know, I like this, but I need some rear profile here that's a little bit more interesting perhaps. So, you know, you can start thinking about how you're going to lay out a different profile back here perhaps and do something like that. You can see it's way far in there. I didn't realize it was going to go that far, but yeah, you can do things like that if needed. So real quick, I'm going to split this maybe. I'll loop cut it actually. And we'll delete this interior section. That's too much. I don't need it that far down there. All right. So there we go. These might not align back here. You see one's slanted, one's not. So what I would do is I would just flatten it out. Just SY0 in this case, you could do that, or you can use machine tools, Alt A, align right. Control Shift S will let you skew. Sometimes you want to skew from a certain corner or a certain vertex. You can use the active element up here. And so Shift double click it, that becomes your active element. Control Shift S. You can see we can do that number like that as well. Now, of course, the machine tools Deus Ex version or whatever, you get the tool that lets you rotate on the edges. I really like that tool, but I found that I almost always crash after using it for some reason. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bug with the add-on. I think it's something that Blender does internally, at least in 3.6. Maybe it was fixed later on, but I don't feel like that's entirely the tool itself's fault. Occasionally certain tools in Blender will do that, even vanilla Blender tools, so it's kind of unfair to put that on machine maybe, but it's like the Blender often has like an undo bug issue that resurfaces every now and then, so it's one of those weird things like that. I think it's just a 3.6 issue that hasn't been fully flushed out maybe. All right, so I'm going to subdivide this edge, pull it down. It's probably going to make this a non-planar face. No, it's flat. Okay, we're good. So you can use vertex snapping. Boom. That normal turn backwards for some reason. Alt N, flip it, merge by distance. And we could symmetrize. We can symmetrize, hit X, and start doing this number if we want. Get rid of some additional vertices. Right, so we're in control of this thing for the most part. Like we can start to really tweak it and do what we want. Like these two verts here, we can press J. It'll join them like that. We get an extra edge. We can use triangles. We can pull those out. We can do all kinds of fun stuff like this and just shift our main forms around, right? And this is why sketching can be so useful to you. And a lot of guys are like, hey, do I need to be a good 2D artist in order to make good 3D models? No, you don't. It's helpful, though, if you can at least sketch a little. Just a little. You don't have to create amazing artwork. But if you can do like doodles like you were back in school, you know, that's great. That's going to work out for you a lot. You know, select something like that, press AF. And let's see what we can do over here. I want to dissolve these for just a moment so it's a single edge. And that way I could probably, you see this one goes up a little bit more, but I want it to go in. Now this is where it gets kind of cool. You can press F. Oop. No, I need a single vertex over here somewhere. Merge those two. Press F. This edge, I know it's hard to see sometimes, but that's the nature of Blender, I think. These two edges here, if you press F, it creates a triangle, right? So now we're good in this respect because we can take this, move it all the way across, merge it to this one. Now when we symmetrize, we'll get a cut like that, boom. And so we can start working out like interior as well. In the case of doing vehicles, a lot of times it's helpful to have a rigged character that you can place in a sit-in position. And that way you'll be able to go through this and get everything proportionally correct with your player character. It's really, really useful to have your player character for if you're working on a game project that you have that going. So you can make sure you have room for the knees and things like that. Cause you know, maybe there's not enough room in this thing Maybe it's a tight squeeze to get in and out of it. Maybe the animations just don't work out well with it. Who knows? You want to be able to test those things a lot of times. And so we need a little bit more room over here, perhaps. Maybe we could cut like a face like this. I like to just press Y and rip these. If you have the Mesh Machine add-on, Y is for the Mesh Machine menu. So you'll have to reassign Mesh Machine's shortcut to use Y. Otherwise, you can just right-click, and it's if you have a face selected, it's like it should be under split right here. So you can just right-click and split if you need to. There's a lot of little tools: Control F, Control V, Control E, and even right-click has sometimes different tools. So you want to get used to using your tools. When you have a shape like this, if you were to just press, let's select this, Control click around, press F, press A, F. When we have solid shapes, you can use booleans still, guys. Like there's no shame in using booleans. I would turn on, you could use dots if you wanted to. It can be quite useful. I like the grid setup. A lot of times the grid is probably using 0.25, which is okay. But you could try using 1 if you're doing more like architecture stuff. And then let me just show you what that does. I've shown it in videos before, but if we set it to 1, do it on the, I got the Simple Pi working, but so you see how it lines up to the object off of the origin point. Okay. Oh, it should be the origin point anyways. So this is usually the meter grid. So these are 1 meter sections, and that's try to change it. Yeah. So this is a very big object right now. We'd have to scale it. But you see, if we start on this face by holding Control, and we can hit Shift. No, these are 10 centimeter sections. Sorry, I'm all over. These big ones are 1 meters. Okay. So it's not as big as I thought it was. You can use different size grids. And while you're using this, you control a mouse wheel up and down. It changes the grid size. So we can go back down to like 50 maybe. Hold Shift. Control and Shift, that is. So yeah, we can do this all day long. We can create little shapes. Press E, cut them out. 1, mirror it. We can do this non-destructively as well. We don't have to do everything destructively. Just to get our concepts going, basically. And you can see, as you go through this process, it's just a lot of fun, I think. And this is the best part of 3D modeling, because you're so free to explore your designs and just really get into it and not feel bogged down by anything really, because the mesh is super simple. You're not worried about topology or anything like that necessarily. You're just trying to create cool, interesting ideas and, you know, get it all going basically. And if you want to turn box cutter off when you're not using it, it's super helpful. But if you want to use other things later on, like curve machine add-on, also super useful. You can definitely do that. I'll symmetrize that, move it over and symmetrize it again and cut it out basically. But curve machine add-on's super fantastic. So you can see we can go to curve and we can do a single point curve with curve machine, right? Go into edit mode. This is a polycurve. But what curve machine allows you to do is you press E and you grab a point. You can hit Control B, and it's not a bevel. It's a blingulate. Okay, just keep that in mind. I always call them bevels, but we can place points where we need. And so the polycurve's really effective now once you get this add-on, in my opinion, because you can at least bevel it or blingulate it. I kept calling it a bevel in one of the videos, and Machine popped in and he said, "Hey, this is a blingulate." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. It's a blingulate." Anyways, so you can see we can grab one of these. You can do one at a time, unfortunately, but still useful. So this is actually, you know, not vertices, it's a curve. So curve machine shortcut, I forgot what the default one is, I think. I set it to Shift W. I set a lot of machine stuff to Shift W for some reason. But you can add depth to it, or you can do extrudes too. So it's just like using your regular tools over here, but you don't have to go to this menu anymore. You can just stay in the modifier panel a lot of times. And So you have all the additional options here available if you want to do tilts, things like that. Or even change radiuses. You can do that, right? So maybe this all gets a little bit thinner through here. You could do that through here as well. Right, so, but actually, no, you can't. Sorry. Misspoke. There's a shortcut for it. It's going to be Control T is tilt, and yeah. Alt S will let you do these ones. So Control T is tilt though. So you can play around with that idea if you want. Control T, rotate them. Hold Control while rotating, it should snap. You see they don't really flow through there. I believe this is what Interpolate does. Yeah, it kind of smooths it out. So that's nice. So this is a fantastic tool if you haven't got this add-on. It's like one of my favorites. I was thinking about this for like a couple months. I was like, man, it'd be really cool if someone made this. And then randomly, this add-on came out. I was super excited about it. So you can do things like exactly like that, basically. And so if you actually took this, I think you can get rid of the caps on it. Fill caps. If you got rid of those, you could subdivide this right now, I think. So it's kind of cool that you can just go through and knock in a subdivision. And if you wanted to, you can still Control X these and dissolve them, basically. So you can see where that works out like that. And later on, you could use this as a base mesh, so you don't have to subdivide it right off the bat. You can convert it to a mesh instead of leaving it as a curve. And then things like this, you can inset, hold Control, hit B, right? We start getting some things like this going on, perhaps. And, little elements like this, we might want to cut them out later. Or maybe we get rid of this, or maybe we don't get rid of it. Let's try doing a loop cut through it, maybe. And it's not loop cutting for some reason, so let's just do a knife cut. All right. All I want to do is cut that face out there. I don't know why I have such an issue with that one. Sometimes the vertex gets left over. You got to delete that thing too. Oh, we got some more issues going on in here than I thought. / isolates, so we don't see everything else. Loop cut here, filter there, delete all of this. Okay, it's more like it. This is why you want to leave things broken up too. It's just helpful. This is mesh now. We don't have any of the curve control anymore. So I'm going to use proportional edit, connected only. That's going to work all the way back down to mesh. And we can mouse wheel, well, when we use proportional edit, it's usually the control wheel, right? You mouse wheel up and down with it. So when I'm in this view, move to the right, mouse wheel up or down until it's about where I need it. And we get this result here, okay? So it's starting to get tucked into there. It's interfering with this piece here. We would have to cut out a little separate section for it perhaps. But the idea still stands that this is now be able to be symmetrized. We can grab this whole loop, press F. If we want to add like a chamfer for now, we could do that, or we could shade it auto smooth, probably be the better option. Right, and so there we go. We're working this piece together little by little. And we can make it look however we want, basically. When I add more detail later, not now. Usually that extra finer detail you can do later. But you'll work this until completion, and that's the main thing. You're free to just work, make things look the way you want, turn proportional edit off in this case, and just really get it going. So I want this to align to there. We have vertex snap on. I press G, hold Control, snap, right? But what if I want this to just align? Trying to think of how I want to do this. What if I want this to align? Well, that's a bad example. Let's press G and hold Control, snap to there. Press E, snap to there. F, snap to there. It doesn't look that good because this is non-planar. AM, merge by distance, and I think we'll just do a J through there for now. I'll have to work that out a little bit different later on. But what I was trying to show is that if you are working certain things, we'll just use an example plane. And go into edit mode, rotate on Y, 90 degrees. Pull that out. So if I want this to align to any of these vertices over here, I can hit G, Shift X, and hold Control And we can line them up like that, right? Shift X or Shift Y or Shift Z, whatever you need. But we can line up to them perfectly. And so vertex snapping works that way as snapping. Most snapping things work that way, but super effective way of working on certain things, perhaps. You can see like G, Shift X, hold Control, boom. We won't lose our position over here, basically. All right. You'll find that this comes in handy a lot. And it doesn't have to be on two axes at the same time. It could just be on one. So like if you extrude this up and you want this to go to like this height here, you just press G and Z, snap it there. You want this to go over here, G, Z, hold Control, bam. You see, so we can kind of almost adopt angles and stuff off of that, which is really quite fantastic. So if we ever want to make like a bigger engine set later on, because, you know, this is our base sketch. It's not really anything set in stone. We're still working the concept here. We can definitely go through and we can just do whatever we need to do here to make this more interesting. And a lot of times just leaving things as separate pieces at first can be useful, because you can Shift D and duplicate edges, vertices, whatever, scale them, rotate them, and go to town making whatever you need to make. If it's backwards, select it all, Alt N, flip it. But you can see we can now maybe bring these back out here. Maybe something like that. We could have just modeled that probably, but whatever. Oh, snap to something behind it. Let's not do that. All right, so that makes plenty of sense, I think, but you know, maybe you didn't want to do it like that. Maybe you wanted to try something a little bit more experimental out. You know, maybe you want to do this, and this needs depth, and it goes out in this direction instead. So now we would have something like these two here, flip the normals. Oop, that really screwed that up. Hold on. Maybe we want these to combine over here. Something like that. All right. We got faces under here we won't probably need after this. We can do these kinds of things. We can do these in separate parts and pieces and chunks. We don't have to make them all combine. That's the whole idea. But combining sometimes can be useful too. So, you know, do as you see fit. But like I want this vertex now to line up to that front one. So G, Shift, Y, hold Control. There you go. I kind of like these with some angle to them. So we can do that. All right, and so on and so forth. We can make a whole nother setup here of some sort. Go to edit mode, scale it, put it here. All right, and you know, don't forget your silhouettes. Silhouettes are huge. We didn't start with silhouettes here, but a lot of guys will start with silhouettes. They'll use something like this marker, some kind of square tip. And they might use it like this and then just push a little bit heavier perhaps, but some guys just turn it off where they have no flow, no opacity control with a pen, and then they just use it as a blocking brush like this. They might even add a little bit of size jitter to it. And so now, you know, you can use it like so, almost like a calligraphy brush, right? And so you can come up with really crazy ideas in silhouette first, and then you drop that, you go back over it again later with some kind of sketching tool, and you start to work out your designs on something like this. Super efficient way of coming up with concepts and sketches for them anyways. Tons of fun too. But then you could take that over and 3D model on it, obviously, right? All right, so with that out of the way, you can do that like that. Now we didn't start with silhouette, so we need to check it as we're working. I have a matte cap pack on Gumroad. Check it out. There's a pure black matte cap, and that's all that's for, is to check silhouettes. So you can maybe hide your reference image for a bit, check your silhouettes, see if it's starting to look interesting. Maybe turn wireframes on too. You can see this one's kind of lame, but this one's pretty cool. That's the one we originally started with. So concepting in 2D from just a side drawing, you can come up with really cool shapes, designs, ideas. But when you're working it out in 3D, you still need to think about those design ideas. Like, is this a cool shape? Is this starting to look the way we want it to? You got to do all 3 axes now at the same time. And that's really what's probably going to give you the most trouble is like, yeah, you can, this is easy. This is going to be a little bit harder to do in 3D in some respect, but you have to practice this if you're going to do your own concepts, obviously, right? You need to start thinking about those shapes and how you make them more interesting, perhaps. And like what you can do with all of it by the end of it anyways. So even just a little slight tweak like that might be a little bit nicer. Maybe we rotate those out a little and squeeze them in. It's okay-ish. Just push them in a little. And then squeeze those over further. Maybe something like that. Who knows? Okay, starting to look a little bit better. So little edits like that. If you had started doing a bunch of booleans and bevels and all kinds, not saying you can't get away with changing your overall form, but you won't feel as free to kind of explore ideas, in my opinion, especially as a beginner. They're a little bit more strict in some ways. Also, when you create Boolean shapes like this, you can set it to local transforms. A lot of times with Boxcutter, it'll create a local transform. You can go into edit mode with the cutters themselves and still move things around. So if you need to adjust things a little bit. So do simple Booleans maybe, you know, if it helps you out. And worry about things like solidify later on, you know, like this kind of stuff is not the most important. It's the design aspect of things that becomes the most important right off the bat. So like you can see I kept this one separate here. It's not, it was made off of the, well, it's made as part of this one. It was made from that. But if I separate it, you know, later on, that's when you start taking pieces like this perhaps, and you start saying like, well, I need to make this more detailed later, right? It needs to have like a grill or something. And this is like little frame around it. So we start doing things like this. Maybe we add some loop cuts. Maybe we bevel these ever so slightly, delete the bevels so we can grab these top edges and we could push those in and pull them up a bit. And then now you got kind of that overlap for a grill maybe. And you can start working out your grill however you see fit. But, you know, make that first, even if you wanted to, just to see what it would look like with a grill like that, you know, if that's something you wanted. You know, do some fills, you know, make it intersect. If you just want to see how it's going to look if it was combined. You don't always have to do the Booleans, right? It's all about just working and processing this thing by the end of it. You could try overlaps too, and this is going to give you plane level differences, positive and negative space differences, right? So things like this right here, we can go through and knock that out. And you'll see this one was actually filled. So it's a little bit tricky on something like this. I really can't do this one like this right now because it's a non-manifold mesh. I can't really do booleans on it all that well. And I can't use Punch It with Machine Tools Deus Ex version. So in this case, I might do something like KC and A and cut like this, right? And I'll talk about the tool here in just a second, the knife tool, what's going on with it. But a lot of times you can do those cuts, and that's a little challenging on this one, actually. I'm going to try to mirror that inside section there for a sec. But it cuts all the way through the mesh, so we should have, at least we should have, but it did not. I'm going to press K, A twice, and cut down. I'm trying to get some vertical sections going, / to isolate if things are in the way. Trying to get it all lined up so it's kind of flat, right? Yeah, so if you wanted to punch something like this out, cursor select it, C to cursor select, you could probably, don't do that, X delete it. I'm going to delete that one for temporary. EZ, hold control, snap it down. You see where this is going? Might build a loop cut here. GZ, hold control. I'm telling you that vertex snapping's everything sometimes. Like you can see we need a vertex here aligning with that one. Right. And these are going to attach here. And that'll be a triangle underneath, I guess, for now. Probably dissolve this whole edge if we wanted to. Actually, I don't know. I got a backwards face here or something. What's going on here? I do. I don't know how that happened, but it did. Okay, that's like the whole backside of that got inverted or something. Oh no, that, okay. We didn't do that right. That's one. Let's grab these faces from back here. And we'll just move them back for a second like that. And dissolve some of this out because it's getting a little messy. All right, symmetrize it. Boom, it's cleaner for the most part. Dissolve that one if you want. Line it up to the top. Line it up to this vertex. You can use active element. S, Z, and 0, and it'll all line up to it. Go back to global, median. So I keep setting these very fast, but median. And you're using machine tools for that, by the way. The add-on there. Let's see how it looks all together now. All right, so let's make it a little bit more sense. A little bit neater. All right, so we got a lot of work to do still, obviously, but the idea starting to work at least to some degree. We really need a character to test it, but overall, yeah, that's the whole idea of this video. I just wanted to run through this. You know, have fun with it, but you know, do explore positive and negative spaces. This is huge. Usually your surface, you want to try going up with it and then down with it. And as you go up, you can just keep creating more importance of things by sticking them on the top surfaces here, perhaps. But also explore going down again on these levels, right? So you can keep going down and then try going back up in areas like this, doing things like that, right? So you have all these different elements going. And that's going to get more into detailing, I would say, because you're still working these panels at a certain point. But you might have like a panel here that does something like this. Let's just keep going with that one. I was going to do a chamfer, but you know, maybe this all comes out at some point. And I'm just going to extrude it, actually. There you go. But this one right here might be a little detail here. You might want to cut it up. And I didn't go over the knife tool, so we'll go over that in just a moment. I just realized I forgot to. Yeah. So you see we're going up, we're going down. Okay. But then we can go up a little bit further with a small detail. And we have like a little ridge here that comes out to the right. Right? Does something like that. Maybe it chamfers at the top. You see what I'm saying? This is where you start getting all your really cool ideas going. And then, so something like this even down here, you know, just imagine splitting it. Let's try doing this again. Over here, pushing it in. And then I'm going to create a new face out of that. I'm just going to scale it down. But then imagine a detail coming out of there, right? So you get these really wild, intricate kind of layouts of different details going on, doing all kinds of just nonsense if you want. Now, the knife tool, all your tools for that matter, for the most part, well, a lot of them anyways, under key map, you type in knife, you'll find the K key, right? You can set options for it in here. They're grayed out, but you set the options, they work. So you can do this on other things too, like bevels, right? Or insets even. So if you find yourself re-clicking the same thing over and over every time you're working, just check it in here. You can go ahead and set them up to do whatever you want them to do. For example, if you look up the 3D cursor, there's a little hidden feature about the 3D cursor. When you use this tool, it's here, and that's aligned to geometry. But this does not correlate to shift right clicking. So you want to go and you might want to modify the 3D cursor, right? So you would have to look up shift right click or the 3D cursor and find the shift right mouse button. And you can align it to geometry. Now this is super useful because now whenever you click on a face, usually it lines up to the face is what it's trying to do. Sometimes it gets it wrong, but a lot of times it'll line up to it just like so, right? So it's rotated. We can hit Shift A, create like a cube. We can align to the 3D cursor, change the size. You see it'll go on that surface now for the most part. So when we're using local orientation, although I don't think this one got it quite right, it's a little bit off, but a lot of times it gets it right. And you would be able to slide this along the surface. If it doesn't get it right though, you can shift right click around. You could take this object, Shift S, and place selection to the cursor, and it'll just, you see what I'm saying? So like we can do that still. And that's just something you can do in Vanilla Blender, but It's kind of a cool little trick there, right? So whenever you want to add details or you want to try out the idea of a detail before you combine it to this mesh, you know, this is what you do. You go through this process where you play around with the shapes and the forms and on the surface of it and break it into as many little parts as you want. It does not matter at the end of the day. You're exploring, you're creating, you're not making like the final game art at this point. You're not doing necessarily the high poly, you're exploring the big ideas, right? And then use mirror tools as needed. You can see this one mirrored across, wherever the heck it mirrored across. Let's try this again. There you go. If you mirrored off of, one of these was off. I think it would be mirrored off that. Yeah. So, you know, Shift S, cursor to world origin, set the object's origin to the cursor maybe. We could do that. And then that way, if we ever symmetrize as well, it'll show up correctly, right? All right, so, or you could just mirror off an object. But I think you get the idea. You just go through this process, have a lot of fun. Super useful to do. And go to your high poly after this, right? Like once you start deciding on this design and you feel like it's ready, like you have all of these questions answered on what you're trying to create here, start working on the high poly models. And, you know, that's when you might use subdivision. You might do all kinds of additional edits. You might be doing like little push-ins here for the window, perhaps. Maybe you separate the window even. There's all kinds of stuff that could happen with high poly modeling, right? So, but then you start doing that basically. And that's where your model starts to look a lot nicer. So we'll just do a quick bevel modifier. And we'll try to subdivide that, see what happens. You can see a lot of this is almost ready to go too. It works out quite well, especially if you're doing very angular stuff. You can a lot of times use bevels, turn clamp overlap off maybe, and change the angle amounts. And so, or you can use weighted bevels or whatever the case. Right? There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But you do want to make sure it's just going to work 100% the way you want it. Subdivide that one. I wouldn't do this right off the bat. Save subdivision for like when you're absolutely sure you're like, this is it. This is what I want to make. Make sure it's all going to like attach to each other correctly and whatnot, you know? All right. Clamp overlap off. You have to turn that off because there's errors in here. Things are going to overlap like this, you see? And so you more than likely will have to go through and bevel things manually or use weighted bevels at least. But yeah, you'll have stretching occurring because you don't have holding edges, so it's not ready for subdivision, obviously. And you'd have to optimize this mesh a little bit nicer, perhaps. Clean it up to quads a little better, perhaps. But it still stands that it works. And you can see the correlation between the parts now. Like it's going to actually, this is actually going to happen when you go through it and with a fine-tooth comb and make everything just the way you want, like cut out the panels and whatnot. It's going to be great by the end of it. Usually anyways. So this is maybe a good way of just trying out ideas. Or you could use quad remesher to do that as well. You want to just convert them to quads real quick and subdivide them, just see what they might look like with a little bit smoother kind of edges and whatnot. Or you could do a bevel shader and just look at it in render preview. Something like that as well. But ultimately, yep. Can you do these? Yep. Is it that hard? No, not at all. That's a lot of fun. And so I'll leave you to it, and I'll see you in the next video. If you like the video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Tell me what you think if you want to do some more game art kind of focus. I've heard this quite a bit from in the comments already, but game art, working on game assets and things like that, more like time-lapse type videos where I go through a project over multiple days, perhaps, something like that. Just let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Take care.